Welcome to the Manhandler, h.a.r.m.s latest all-purpose death trap and automated torture device. Let's take a look at what today's victim has in store, shall we?
If there's one game series that's in dire need of a remaster, it's No One Lives Forever. The first game, released way back in 2000, was developed by Monolith Productions, a super talented group of people responsible for some of the best first-person shooters ever made, like Blood, Fear, Alien vs Predator 2, and also one of the best hobo beat-em-ups of all time with Condemned Criminal Origins. They seem to have a pretty bad streak though when it comes to sequels. I mean, aside from AVP 2, I think most people would agree that Blood 2, Condemned 2, and even Fear 2 don't quite stack up with the high quality of their predecessors. The same thing too with No One Lives Forever. That's a pretty hard act to follow.
Why not just kill her?
The first game was a really well written and unique stealth/shooter where you played as fledgling spy Kate Archer in the 1960s.
Well, hello there.
Taken on an evil organisation called h.a.r.m., who were hell-bent on holding the world hostage with a biological weapon. It was part Get Smart, part Austin Powers, but all around just a really good time. And it's a criminally underrated game that's been sitting in copyright limbo for far too long now.
Rubbish!
The sequel, A Spy in Harm's Way, was released in 2002, right before Half-Life 2 and Doom 3 were unleashed on the world, thrusting first-person shooters into a new era, but also marking a real transition point for video game graphics at the time. From this point on, it was the age of dynamic lighting, bump and specular mapping, along with bloom. The Unreal Engine 3 was still a couple of years off, and then from that point on, video games would reach that next plateau of presentation. So, as a result, I think NOLF 2 comes from a bit of a bygone era, where creativity and talent was more important than just having your game run on an engine that allowed it to get away with an otherwise mediocre art style. And you notice pretty quickly just how NOLF 2 is a noticeably better looking game than the first one. Textures are more sharp and detailed, and the variety in the architecture makes each location you visit seem much more unique. There's also a lot of neat little engine effects they've added in too. The water in h.a.r.m.'s secret underwater base, for instance, and then this stuff, which is what's referred to as synthetic lava. I mean, it has definitely lost a bit of its vibrance compared to the locations in the first game, but it is hands down a much more detailed and better looking game at its core, even if artistically it does differ. Now, the story takes place after the events of the first game. Kate Archer, having prevented h.a.r.m.'s attempt to infect the world with a biological weapon, is still working with Unity, only now having to deal with a much more realistic crisis: the ongoing tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union. Yeah, that boring old Cold War malarkey that went on for the better part of half a goddamn century. Kate's entire mission revolves around her trying to find details of something called Project Omega, along with dealing with the remnants of h.a.r.m. who want revenge, and a Japanese woman named Asako who's been hired to kill her.
Her head on a platter should suffice.
One of the biggest improvements in the story is that the cinematics are now a lot better, with actual animations this time, and much less of people just statically standing around in a room talking to each other. Characters often move around the environment as they speak. There's more attention to detail with facial animations and lip syncing, and it's just far more engaging and less static, which is a good thing, considering some of these cinematics can run for upwards of 5 or so minutes.
Director, there's a call. There's an urgent telephone call for you.
I think the only thing I dislike about Kate in this game, and something that I've never managed to get my head around, is that they've replaced her voice actor h.a.r.m.s for Jen Taylor.
Something about this assignment feels wrong.
I've never been able to find much information online about h.a.r.m.s to confirm whether or not she's actually Scottish, but she definitely does a better accent than Jen Taylor does. Every time I hear Jen Taylor, all I can think of is Cortana from Halo, and just hearing that voice always disconnects me from the game. I mean, it doesn't sound like Kate Archer anymore, it sounds like someone trying to do a Kate Archer impersonation.
I've kicked your ass before, I can do it again.
Have you always been a coward, or is it a recent development?
It's nothing against Jen, it's just that curse that a lot of those popular video game voice actors face after they land a massive iconic role. Doesn't help that she also voices Isako, and look, let me tell ya, her Japanese accent is about on par with her Scottish one. Whenever there's a cinematic where Kate and Isako are talking to each other, it's like you're watching someone have a conversation with themselves. I mean, it's just weird.
What do you say we pretend we didn't see each other? I can't.
Speaking of accents, you've got the return of those cliche accents for all of the various ethnicities you come across.
Whiskey straight up!
I think probably one of the best ones being for the French mimes, who form one of the new factions in the game.
Fred Astaire. Bicycle. Pony!
And what is it with Monolith Productions and all the hate against mimes?
I hate mimes.
Then there's the voice acting for the Indian characters done by voice actors that are very clearly not Indian.
I'm sorry, but this area is off limits to you.
But thankfully this was done back at a time when people didn't feel the need to get offended over something like this.
Employees only.
Overall, it's an enjoyable and entertaining rogue gallery of bad guys that Kate's got to deal with. You got the return of Dmitry Volkov. There's h.a.r.m.s director, who's a middle-aged balding guy who's constantly on the phone to his overbearing mother. And then old mate Magnus Armstrong, who's seen the errors of his ways after getting his ass beat and now works alongside Kate for the second half of the game. Sorry, spoilers.
Oh, I hope you don't break a nail.
Still though, there is a definite sense of there being less than C to do here overall. I mean, despite it being about the same length from start to finish, it just seems like there's far less environments for the player to actually explore. In the first game, you went to Morocco, Berlin, Hamburg, England, Washington State, the Caribbean, Bavaria, and then even space at one point, among a bunch of others. And you went to and from each of these locations pretty quickly, almost from mission to mission, giving the game a great sense of pacing. In Nolf 2, you start off at Japan, which is really just an extended tutorial before you then spend a sizable chunk of the game in Siberia. Yeah, and when I say sizable, I really mean it.
You asked for it!
After that, you head to Ohio for a bit, before then another long series of missions in India. There's a quick detour in Alaska for one mission, then another set in the Unity HQ, before the finale of the game set in a fictional island in the Mediterranean. Now, while the amount of locations seems to be around the same, the amount of time you spend in each of these is a lot different. I'd say about 75% of the game is spent in both Siberia and India, which is like a constant speed bump on the pacing of the campaign. The mission in Ohio and Alaska makes for fun distractions, but they're really just interludes in between the longer and more pivotal sections of the campaign. Siberia is also a lot different to anything else from the first game and almost kind of reminds me of Half-Life 2. It's got a very open-ended map design, allowing you to choose which order you want to complete your objectives, and the whole premise of exploring this Russian countryside is kind of similar to driving along Highway 17 in Gordon's buggy. I mean, there's even a similar section moving underneath a precarious bridge. Most of these missions encourage stealth over combat, and the same thing goes for India, where they even take it one step further by including civilians and police officers that you can't even attack and have to avoid entirely. If nothing else though, the music in these areas is fucking amazing. In fact, the music in general is just awesome. It's honestly on par, if not better than the first game. And every single location you visit has its own motifs, which really highlight and capture the culture of where you're visiting. The music during the Siberia mission is some of my absolute favourite in the entire series. And trust me when I say that you'll never hear the feeling of drinking vodka and Cossack dancing caught in audio forms so flawlessly ever again.
Feeling sleepy.
India's music uses a sitar and a tabla to great effect, but then get into combat and you'll hear the series' wacky roots and humour shine through. I feel like we often gloss over music when we talk about video games, but I think that this is one soundtrack that's definitely worth praising. Now, when it comes to the gameplay side of things, Nolf 2 is a game that again lets you choose your own approach to completing missions. And basically, it's a binary choice. You can either sneak through everything and try to remain undetected, or go in guns blazing. Unlike the first game too, if you are detected, it's no longer a mission restart. You've just got to deal with that annoying sound of a siren going off and enemies chasing after you.
Sound the alarm!
I think the biggest new addition here is the inclusion of skill points. So as you're moving through the levels, completing objectives, finding pieces of intel, you can also earn skill points. And when you've got enough of these, you can upgrade one of Kate's skills. Stealth, stamina, marksmanship, carrying, armor, weapons, gadgets, and search. Fuck! I honestly think someone at Monolith must have just played Deus Ex before they started working on this thing, and then decided they wanted to add in their own skill point system as well. And just like in Deus Ex, you're not going to be able to max out all of these. Gotta say though that I always thought that this skill system didn't make all that much sense. I mean, the game takes place after the first one, right? Where Kate basically saved the world from annihilation, along with taking h.a.r.m. down almost entirely by herself. But yet now it's like she's reverted back to being a rookie or something, and all of her skills and abilities have gone back to square one. Also, once you finish the game, all of these upgrades get reset. I mean, even though there's a mission select option, it still reverts all of your skill points back to the beginning. If this game came out nowadays, there'd be the option to go back in and find all the stuff you missed, but sadly, this was a game released before the simple convenience of a mechanic designed for completionists became commonplace. But if nothing else, it actually does encourage and reward the player for going off and spending time to head off and find all those little pieces of intel and complete all these side objectives. However, I would still define this thing as 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And by that I mean that for every couple of things this game does right, it also somehow manages to bugger something else up. Searching, for instance, is probably the most tedious new mechanic they've added in, and just a bad idea in general. So, you know how in like every first-person shooter ever made, all you usually have to do is walk over a weapon or item to pick it up? Yeah, well, in this game you have to manually grab the item. Now, this isn't an issue for picking up most things, but it can be an issue if you're trying to get something like ammo during combat, because you're going to have to aim down at an enemy's corpse to quickly search them for ammo. Most of the time, searching someone's body is going to give you something that is literally useless, like a handkerchief, a movie ticket, or your mum's phone number, but sometimes enemies are also going to carry important mission-related items. And because a lot of these things are also randomly generated, you kind of have to search every single enemy you come across. Not to mention all the time you'll spend rifling through filing cabinets, desk drawers, and cupboards for that one crucial piece of intel you actually need. As you level up that searching skill, this does become a lot quicker, and when the skill is maxed out, it's actually instant. But focusing on that means you're forgoing all of your other more important skills, for the convenience of what's basically just reducing time you'd otherwise be wasting. I don't know, man, I've always just thought that this was a bad mechanic, and that's an opinion that hasn't really changed over these years either. Still sucks.
Can we postpone this?
The weapons have also had a bit of a reworking too. In the first game, for instance, you had 3 pistols. You had a .38 revolver, a Luger, and the Walter P38.
Saved my life.
Now in Nov 2, it's all been dialed back, and all you've got is a Beretta. So instead of 3 pistols with 2 different ammo calibers and alternate ammo types to worry about, now it's just the one. One of the submachine guns has also been removed, with only the AK and the Gordon SMG making a return, along with a new addition in the form of a goddamn Tommy gun. Instead of the Hampton carbine and the Dragunov for the sniper rifles, now you've just got a basic bolt-action rifle. Probably the best addition though is the shotgun, which was oddly absent from the first game, and is hands down one of the most powerful guns when they actually give you ammo for it. And of course, Kate wouldn't be Kate without her hunting crossbow, a weapon that's still perfect for shooting someone from such a far distance away that it could only be described as unsportsmanlike.
I see you!
Overall, I'd say the shooting is okay, it gets the job done, but really not much more. Most enemies in the game are hit scanners, and leaning around corners to shoot at someone makes you way more harder to hit. And it often just becomes a matter of leaning around a corner and then letting the enemies rush you in single file. It's definitely at its worst during the sections where you're fighting all of these female ninjas who can throw shurikens at you incessantly and pretty much never miss. These sections and levels are so unfun that I just have to assume that whoever designed them was just having a really bad day and wanted to take their frustration out on the player. Well, that's a case, mission accomplished. Yeah, and if those female ninja voices are sounding familiar, well guess what? Jen Taylor did those too.
I see you! I know you're here somewhere.
Ninjas also happen to drop a katana and shurikens that Kate can use as well. And the only thing sadder than how underused these weapons are is the thought of someone at Monolith Productions working tirelessly to add it into the game in the first place.
I'm sorry.
Overall though, it is a much simpler and streamlined arsenal for Kate to worry about, and keeping things in line with being more simplified, they've made it now so using your gadgets is downright autonomic. Now, instead of having to manually flick through your entire inventory, you can just hold down the interact button on an object and then Kate's going to pull out the right gadget automatically. No muss, no fuss. When you finish using the gadget, she'll also swap right back to whatever weapon you were previously using. I mean, it's such a simple yet effective quality of life addition. There's also a pretty fun list of toys here to play around with too. Kate's mascara kit, for instance, now doubles as a stun gun. Instead of a flashlight, she's now using her glowing Unity keychain. The lockpick is a repurposed nail clipper, the welder is a can of hairspray, and her decoder is a makeup case. A lot of Kate's previous gadgets, like the acid, sleep, and stun spray, which were originally disguised as types of perfume, which have now instead been turned into different grenade types.
You're in for it.
time for a siesta.
One of the more unique items to make a return is the body remover, which is able to deatomize corpses and now looks like a little bottle of perfume, which is kind of ironic because in the first game, it was one of the more generic looking items. I mean, in the first game, this was just a little bottle with a cliche skull and crossbones icon. And yet, despite all of these high-tech toys, one of the best new gadgets, if I can call it that, is nothing fancier than a good old ripe banana. Yeah, throw this thing down on the ground and watch as enemies slip over it and knock themselves out cold.
Oops!
Well, I don't know, how about a goddamn bear trap, son?
Oh, it hurts!
All of these elements combine to make what's really otherwise a pretty standard and basic combat system into something much more unique and creative.
What the heck was...
You're basically just being given the keys to the toy box and able to choose what you want to do with them. It's a shame then that one of the weaker aspects of the entire game is the other side of the coin, which is the stealth, which isn't really all that improved upon from the first game. This is, again, all connected to the skill point system, and the higher your stealth rating, the less likely you are to be seen. As far as I can tell, if you are standing in front of someone, regardless of the distance, they're gonna see you eventually. Compared to the first game though, you've now got an actual lean button, and in some darkened corners of certain levels, you'll even find these specific spots where if you stand still for a few seconds, you're then able to blend in with the shadows and become hidden. Because, yeah, that's how standing in shadows works, isn't it? You stand still for a couple of seconds and then you can't be seen. However, much like the first game, there's just still no consistency to any of this. And despite having finished this game probably, I don't know, a dozen or so times over the course of my life, I gotta say that the stealth in Nolv 2 is still something that I've just never truly been able to get the hang of. I think that prior to Splinter Cell coming out, the apex of 3D stealth games was the Thief series. In those games, you've got multiple movement speeds, there's different noise surfaces, leaning left and right, and even the gem that shows just how visible you really are. And as a point of comparison, well, it just shits over anything that Nolv 2 does. One of the worst levels is where you've got to avoid the police in India and pull down all of these wanted posters, and this thing's just outright trial and error. You can't even cheese your way through it too by knocking out the cops because you've got no weapons. Now, I've said this in countless other videos, and I'll say it again because it bears repeating, and that is that I think the hallmark of a good stealth system is one that once you get the hang of, you can then pull it off with little to no trouble from then on in. And that's why games like Thief, Splinter Cell, and Metal Gear Solid to an extent are timeless. Because you always know what it is that's giving you away to enemies, or more importantly, not giving you away. That kind of basic stealth system might have been okay for the first game, but this one came out in 2002, and that was the year that we got Splinter Cell. So going back and playing something like Nolv 2, well, it seems kinda dated. One of Kate's new toys this time around is the utility launcher, which can fire out a bunch of different dart types that can aid you in staying undetected and also help out during combat. The most crucial one of these fires out a dart, which then tracks enemies on your minimap, so you can keep tabs on them as they patrol the area. Gotta say too, I think it's funny how shooting someone with a tracking dart, which leaves a noticeable blood decal as it hits them, doesn't cause them to react to taking a high-speed prick to the body. Then again, your mum's been taking high-speed pricks for years and she seems to be doing alright.
Goodbye, mother.
Anyway, you can also fire out tranquilizer darts, which are pretty handy apart from the fact that enemies often wake up a couple of minutes later. There's a dart which can power down security cameras, there's another one which can cause robots to explode, and in one of the final levels you can even fire glue darts, causing them to stick to the ground and become easy pickings. But it's just kinda like a temporary solution to a more underlying and ongoing problem. The stealth becomes doubly annoying during some levels because for some asinine reason, someone thought it would be a good idea to include constantly respawning enemies. So what that means is that trying to be stealthy and taking enemies out is just going to be utterly pointless, because a new guard is going to be spawning in no matter what you do. There's no real reason to go non-lethal in this game either. The only times you're trying to sneak past innocent people like civilians or cops, you don't get the option to kill them anyway. Every time you are given free and murderous reign, the people you're up against are either enemy soldiers or members of h.a.r.m., the latter being clear-cut comical bad guys. And there's just no point to trying to knock someone out and put them to sleep when they're just going to wake up a couple of minutes later and cause a ruckus. But also, there's just no point to playing the pacifist, especially against bad guys who probably have a lower life expectancy than a housefly.
That makes 14, Mr. Volkov. Do you feel better yet?
A little. Let's do one more.
I will say though that in the game's defense, the enemy AI is pretty damn intelligent at times. They'll get suspicious from things like a door left open and lights turned off. If they hear any noises, they'll head off and investigate, and they're frustratingly good at running for the nearest alarm when they see you, which is so annoying and brings my piss to a boil just thinking about it.
Sound the alarm.
I think the way that I found the most enjoyment when I'm playing this game was just to take the stealth or the combat as it came to me. I mean, I do my best to stay out of sight, I'm playing a spy after all, but if I was seen, I didn't really worry about loading a save file to give it another go. If you try to approach this thing as an outright stealth game and ghost it from start to finish, well, I'm sure you can do it, but it's not going to be a very enjoyable experience, and you better expect a whole heap of bullshit along the way.
Cover me!
It's like they've tried to make a game that caters to both stealth and shooting, but just not decided which one they prefer.
Don't make her age angry!
One of the biggest problems that Null 2 has faced throughout all of these years, aside from even getting a copy of it, is just to get the damn thing running in the first place.
Do it yourself.
When the game first came out, I don't really remember having any issues getting it working properly, but obviously ever since then, it's just been an absolute arsehole. If you can even manage to install it and get it running, you'll face issues with the wonky mouse aiming, there's constant crashes, and the latest one I've encountered is that whenever the music changes to combat mode, my game starts to become really choppy and stutters. Unlike the first game, this one never got ported to any of the consoles, which might be a blessing in disguise though, considering how crappy that PS2 port was. So my point, I guess, is that playing it on the PC and dealing with all of these technical issues is something you're kinda stuck with. Thankfully though, it is pretty easy to download a fully patched and mostly functional version of the game. I don't know if I'll get in trouble by advertising this thing, but this version shouldn't be too hard to find with just a simple Google search.
Mon Dieu, just tell me!
The only thing that ever came out after this was the horrendous spin-off, Contract Jack, which came out a year later and just should have been an expansion pack, but for some reason they decided to make it a standalone title. This thing doesn't get criticised enough as far as I'm concerned, and it really deserves more scorn and ridicule, because honestly, it really is one of the worst games ever made, and it feels like it's had absolutely no thought or polish put into it whatsoever. It just feels like a lazy, sloppily thrown together cash grab, again like a lot of other expansion packs for the Monolith games. Same thing goes for the expansion pack for Blood 2, AVP 2, and Fear 2. In this thing, you're playing as a dude named Jack, who's a former mob enforcer hired by h.a.r.m., to head to Italy and kidnap a scientist from a rival faction named Danger. Now yeah, that premise might sound kinda fun, but fun this is not. The issue I think is that it just completely removes almost all of these unique elements that the franchise has got going for it, and just turns it into a bog standard shooting game. A shooting game which is the epitome of mindless, where you just shoot hundreds, if not thousands of enemies over the course of the 3 or 4 hours it takes to beat. Here's the thing though, right? The shooting in the Nolf games isn't all that amazing. As a last resort, it was acceptable, and the few short forced combat sequences in the game often didn't last all that long. But when you've got an entire game that's just focused on combat and shooting things, where you're doing that pretty much 99% of the time, well, those flaws are going to become much more apparent. And I'd say that you kill more people in the first level of Contract Jack alone than you do in the entirety of the second game. I mean, let that put things into perspective. Enemies are incredibly spongy, the reload times are way too slow, and they've still included those pseudo-RPG elements to the shooting, where your aim is improved when you're standing still, so yeah, forget about playing this as a run and gun shooter. I'm not kidding either when I say the whole thing is mindless. The first level, you're just killing the same looking mobsters over and over. The next level, it's the same looking h.a.r.m. henchmen over and over. Then for the level after that, it's the same looking soldiers. Then later on, you're in space, shooting the same looking dudes in spacesuits, using a laser gun that they couldn't even be bothered to make a reload animation for. No matter where you are or what you're doing, you'll still be taking part in the genocide of countless generic looking enemies. Jack doesn't really have all that much dialogue either, making him about as interesting as a goddamn ironing board. And for a game with such a high enemy count, they're also really stingy on the ammo. I lost count the amount of times I found myself without any ammo while I still had a half a dozen enemies bearing down on me. It sucks. The last mission in this one is one of the worst things ever designed by another human being. You're moving across the Italian countryside on a Vespa mounted with a machine gun. And I mean, yeah, I guess it sounds kinda fun, but you're taking on a literal army of bad guys. It really is one of the worst things I've ever experienced in my entire life, and I say that after just having lived through 2020. About the only thing I think they've objectively improved is how you can now pick up weapons and ammo by just walking over them. That whole searching mechanic is gone, thank God. But still, the whole thing is just a damn shame, especially considering it's the last game we've had in the series. All of this is just kind of bringing it back to why I said that this is the kind of game that's just begging for a remaster. Notice I said remaster, not a remake. I've seen how remakes end up a lot of the time these days, and it's not a pretty sight. It's kind of like looking into the devil's anus. It's a sight I'm never going to be able to forget. In all seriousness though, a remaster would just be the perfect thing for this, along with fixing a lot of the game's niggling technical and gameplay issues. Because I think if you wipe away a lot of that stuff, that this is a game that people would really still enjoy to play, even in the current year. And I think if nothing else, it would at least earn it some much more deserved recognition.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Kate Archer, I think, is one of the most unsung protagonists of all time, and the writing and the comedy in this sequel still shines through almost 20 years later.
Please, don't do this. I beg you.
Feed him into the machine.
And then after you've played and finished it, you can join up to that elusive club along with the other 12 people who've also managed to do the same.
Oops.